to the 6th episode of Black World History. Today we will be looking at some of the Caribbean's national heroes who fought against slavery and European colonization. Let us start off with the country of Haiti. Toussaint L'Ouverture, born May 20th, 1743 and died April 7th, 1803. Louverture was the leader of the Haitian Revolution, which started in 1791 and ended a year after he died. Born François Dominique Toussaint Breda, Toussaint Louverture was the chief figure of the Haitian Revolution. He was formerly enslaved before he became a brilliant general and a capable administrator, defeating the British, Spanish, and French troops, emancipating the enslaved population, and overseeing the country's initial attempts at reforming its political and social structure. Jean-Jacques Dessalines, born September 20th, 1758, and died October 17, 1806. Dessalines was a leader of the Haitian Revolution and an emperor of Haiti around 1804 to 1806 under the name of Jacques I. He was also known to have been a notorious genocidist as he had wiped out Haiti's white population. He was then regarded as a founding father of Haiti. Dessalines was born as a servant in Grande Rivière du Nord, which was the French colony of Saint-Domingue on the island of Hispaniola. He first served as an officer in the French army and later rose to become a commander in the revolt against the same colonial power. After the capture of Toussaint L'Ouverture in 1802, Dessalines became leader of the revolution, and after defeating the French troops sent by Napoleon in November 1803, he declared Haiti independent on the 1st of January 1804 in Gonesse. He assumed the office of Governor General, but then he declared himself Emperor of Haiti. Henri Christophe, born October 6, 1767 and died October 8, 1820. He was formerly enslaved. Then after, he became a key leader in the Haitian Revolution, which succeeded in gaining independence from France in 1804. Christophe created a kingdom in the north and had himself proclaimed Henry I, King of Haiti. He also created a nobility and named his legitimate son, Jacques Victor Henry, as prince and heir to the throne. He was born on the island of Grenada, a former British colony. His parents were slaves brought to Grenada with thousands of other West Africans to work in the sugar industry. The Africans that the English used as slaves in the sugar industry were known for their fierce and determined nature to resist the institution of slavery. The revolutionary nature of Henri Christophe clearly had its roots deeply embedded in his African ancestry and in his will to be freed from captivity in the West. Jamaica. The Right Excellent Nanny of the Maroons, Queen Nanny, was born in 1686 and died in 1733. Nanny was born in Ghana, West Africa, into the Ashanti tribe, and then was brought to Jamaica under enslavement. It is believed that some of her family members were involved in intertribal conflict, and her village was captured. Nanny and several relatives were sold as enslaved Africans and sent to Jamaica. Upon arrival, Nanny was likely sold to a plantation in the St. Thomas parish. The plantations that she was enslaved on grew sugar cane as the main crop, and the enslaved worked under extremely harsh conditions day by day. When Nanny was a child, she became influenced by other enslaved leaders and Maroons. She and her brothers, Akampong, Cujo, Johnny, and Cole, ran away from their plantation and hid in the Blue Mountains area north of the parish. While in hiding, they split up to organize more Maroon communities across Jamaica. Cudjoe went to St. James Parish and organized a village, which later was named Cudjoe Town. Accompong settled in St. Elizabeth in a community now known as Accompong Town. Nanny and Cole founded communities in Portland. She was married to a Maroon named Ado but had no children. Nanny and her brothers became folk heroes. Her most famous brother, Cudjoe, went on to lead several slave rebellions in Jamaica with the aid of her other brothers. By 1720, Nanny and Cole had settled and controlled an area in the Blue Mountains. It was given the name Nanny Town and consisted of the 500 acres of land granted to the runaway slaves. Nanny Town had a strategic location as it overlooked Stone River through a 900-foot ridge which prevented the British from making surprise attacks on the settlement. The Maroons in the town also organized lookouts for such an attack, as well as designated warriors who could be summoned by the sound of a horn called an abeng. The Maroons of Nanny Town and similar communities survived by sending traders to the nearby market towns to exchange food for weapons and cloth. The community raised animals, hunted, and grew crops, and was organized very much like a typical Ashanti tribe in Africa. They were also known for raiding plantations for weapons and food, burning the plantations, and leading slaves back to their communities. Nanny was very proficient at organizing plans to free enslaved peoples. For over 30 years, Nanny freed more than 800 slaves and helped them to resettle in the Maroon community. Nanny was a leader of the Maroons at the beginning of the 18th century. She was known by both the Maroons and the British settlers as an outstanding military leader who became, in her lifetime and after, a symbol of unity and strength for her people during times of crisis. She was particularly important to them in the fierce fight with the British during the First Maroon War from 1720 to 1739. Both legends and documents refer to her as having exceptional leadership qualities. She was a small woman with piercing eyes. Her influence over the Maroons was so strong that it seemed to be supernatural and was said to be connected to her powers of Obeah. She was particularly skilled in organizing the guerrilla warfare carried out by the Eastern Maroons to keep away the British troops who attempted to penetrate the mountains to overpower them. Besides inspiring her people to ward off the troops, Nanny was also a type of chieftainess or wise woman of the village, who passed down legends and encouraged the continuation of customs, music, and songs that had come with people from Africa and which instilled in them confidence and pride. Her spirit of freedom was so great that in 1739, when Cole signed the second treaty with the British, it was reported that Nanny was very angry and in disagreement with the principle of peace with the British, which she knew meant another form of subjugation. There were many legends about Nanny among the Maroons. Some even claim that there were several women who were leaders of the Maroons during this period of history. But all the legends and documents refer to Nanny of the First Maroon War as the most outstanding of them all, leading her people with courage and inspiring them to struggle to maintain that spirit of freedom and life of independence which was their rightful inheritance. The British offered an award to loyal slaves for Nanny's defeat, and under the command of Captain Sambo, namely William Cuffy, a black man, was rewarded for having fought the Maroons in the First Maroon War, and who is called a very good party Negro, having killed Nanny. These hired soldiers were known as black shots, and they were former members of the Maroon settlements. This reward would also give some of these slaves the promise of freedom. It is likely that Cuffy was motivated by the reward, a common practice by plantations to discourage slaves escaping. Nanny remains are buried at Bump Grave in Moortown, one of the communities established by the Windward Maroons in the Portland Parish. The Right Excellent Samuel Sharpe, born 1801 and died the 23rd of May 1832. Famously known as Sam Sharpe, Samuel Sharpe, a Creole slave, was born in Montego Bay in 1801. Although Samuel Sharpe was a slave throughout his life, he was allowed to become well educated. Due to his education, he was well respected by other enslaved Africans in Jamaica, and he was a well-known preacher and leader. Sharpe was a deacon at the Burchell Baptist Church in Montego Bay, whose pastor was Reverend Thomas Burchell. Sam Sharpe spent most of his time traveling to different parishes in Jamaica, educating slaves about freedom and Christianity. Samuel Sharpe was the main instigator of the 1831 Slave Rebellion, which began on the Kensington estate in St. James, and which was largely instrumental in bringing about the abolition of slavery. Because of his intelligence and leadership qualities, Sam Sharpe became a daddy or leader of the native Baptists in Montego Bay. Religious meetings were the only permissible forms of organized activities for the slaves. Sam Sharpe was able to communicate his concern and encourage political thought concerning events in England which affected the slaves and Jamaica. Sam organized a plan of passive resistance in 1831 by which the slaves would refuse to work on Christmas Day of 1831 and afterwards to voice their grievances concerning better treatment and the consideration of freedom. They in turn took the plan to the other parishes until the idea had spread throughout St. James, Trelawney, Westmoreland, Manchester, and St. Elizabeth. Word of the plan reached the ears of some of the planters. Troops were sent into St. James, and warships were anchored in Montego Bay and Black River with their guns targeting the towns. On December 27, 1831, the Kensington Estate Great House was set on fire as a signal that the slave rebellion had begun. A series of other fires broke out in the area, and soon it was clear that the plan of non-violent resistance, which Sam Sharpe intended, became impossible and impractical. Armed rebellion and seizing of properties spread mostly through the western parishes, but the uprising was put down by the first week in January. While 14 whites died during the rebellion, more than 500 slaves lost their lives, most of them as a result of the court trials that followed afterwards. Samuel Sharpe was hanged on the 23rd of May, 1832. In 1834, the Abolition Bill was passed by the British Parliament, and in 1838, slavery was abolished. Sharpe had said, "I would rather die upon yonder gallows than live in slavery." The Right Excellent Marcus Mosiah Garvey Jr., born August 17, 1887, and died June 10, 1940. Marcus Mosiah Garvey Jr. was the first to be officially ordained as a national hero of Jamaica. He was a political leader, publisher, journalist, entrepreneur, and orator who was a committed advocate of Black nationalism and Pan-Africanism movements. This led him to found the Universal Negro Improvement Association and African Communities League, which is UNIA-ACL. He founded the Black Star Line, which is a part of the Back to Africa movement, which promoted the return of the African diaspora to their ancestral lands. Prior to the 20th century, leaders such as Prince Hall, Martin Delany, Edward Wilmot Blyden, and Henry Highland Garnet advocated the involvement of the African diaspora in African affairs. Garvey was unique in advancing a Pan-African philosophy to inspire a global mass movement and economic empowerment focusing on Africa known as Garveyism. Promoted by the UNIA as a movement of African redemption, Garveyism would eventually inspire others ranging from the Nation of Islam to the Rastafarian movement, which proclaims Garvey as a prophet. Garvey was born in St. Ann's Bay, St. Anne, to Mosiah Garvey Sr., a mason, and Sarah Jane Richards, a domestic worker. Of his 11 siblings, only Marcus and his sisters Indiana survived until adulthood. Garvey's father was known to have a large library, and it was from his father that Marcus gained his love for reading. In 1900, Garvey entered into an apprenticeship with his uncle, Alfred Burroughs, who also had an extensive library, of which young Marcus made good use. In 1910, Garvey left Jamaica and began traveling throughout the Central American region. He lived in Costa Rica for several months, where he worked as a timekeeper on a banana plantation. He began work as editor for a daily newspaper titled The Nacional in 1911. Later that year, he moved to Colon, Panama, where he edited a bi-weekly newspaper before returning to Jamaica in 1912. After years of working in the Caribbean, Garvey left Jamaica to live in London from 1912 to 1914, where he attended Birkbeck College, taking classes in law and philosophy, worked for the African Times and Orient Review, published by Toussaint Muhammad Ali, and sometimes spoke at Hyde Park Speaker's Corner. Garvey's philosophy was influenced by Booker T. Washington, Martin Delany, and Henry McNeill Turner. It is said that Toussaint Muhammad Ali influence shaped Garvey's speeches and led him to organize the Universal Negro Improvement Association, which is UNIA, in Jamaica in 1914. Garvey died on June 10, 1940, after 2 strokes. Because of travel restrictions during World War II, he was buried at Kensal Green Cemetery in London. He was age 52. It was rumored that Garvey was in fact poisoned on a boat on which he was traveling. In 1964, his remains were exhumed and taken to Jamaica. On the 15th of November 1964, the government of Jamaica, having proclaimed him Jamaica's first national hero, reburied him at a shrine in the National Heroes Park. Garvey's legacy can be summed up in the philosophy he taught, which is race pride, the need for African unity, self-reliance, the need for black people to be organized, and for rulers to govern on behalf of the working class. Barbados. The Right Excellent Bosah, born unknown but died 1816. He is a national hero of Barbados. He was born a free man in Africa in the 18th century before he was captured and brought to the island in enslavement. While documented in historical references as Bosah, Boso, or Bosol, his actual birth name remains a mystery, as does his majority of his life. Bosah had character, strength, and passion to enforce change. It is this courage and sheer determination that is documented in the books of history. It is a fact that Bosah played an integral role in changing the social and political climate of the island. On Sunday, April 14, 1816, Bosah, a head ranger at Bailey's plantation, led what has been recorded as the Bosah Rebellion, a tremendous revolt against the racist white sugar cane planters, which resulted in battle between slaves, the planters, and the 1st West India Regiment. The rejection of the Imperial Registry Bill in November 1815 seemingly ignited strategic planning amongst elite senior slaves to combat the oppression and racism of which they were subjected to. Led by Bosah and aided by Washington Franklin, Nanny, and a number of other black revolutionaries, the Bosah Rebellion was not only the first serious uprising since 1692, but also the longest. The war which broke out between the two races had a tremendous impact on the historical development of Barbados. Carefully executed by approximately 400 slaves at plantations scattered around Barbados, the Bosah Rebellion was geared towards overthrowing the racist white planter class in an aggressive attempt to regain freedom, restructure the politics of the island, and create a better life for black and colored people. Mosiah was killed in battle and the revolt forced into submission by the regiment who had an armory of superior weapons at their disposal. This slave rebellion is, however, documented as the most significant revolt in the history of Barbados. In 1985, 169 years after the revolt, a tremendous bronze statue symbolizing the strength of emancipation was erected on a roundabout situated on the ABC Highway. Barbadians gave this statue the name of Mosiah to honor the courageous freedom fighter. The Right Excellent Sarah Ann Gill, born February 16, 1795, and died February 25, 1866. A national hero of Barbados, Sarah Ann Gill was a social and religious leader in Barbados during the era of slavery. By an act of parliament in 1998, she was named as one of the 10 national heroes of Barbados. She was born of a black mother and a white father, whose last name was Gill, of course, and she was baptized with the name Anne. She was a free colored woman who chose Methodism as her religion, and by 1820, Mrs. Gill was a full member of the church. Methodism in Barbados grew in popularity, but so did the hostility towards it. Membership included blacks and those referred to as colored. In October 1823, a white mob of rioters destroyed the chapel and the Methodist missionary. Reverend William Shrewsbury, the reverend of the church, and his wife had no choice other than to leave the island to protect themselves and the life of their unborn child. Methodism was brought to the shores of Barbados by Dr. Thomas Cope in the year 1788. This new religion changed the existing social order and was met with great hostility by the upper class of the island. By 1793, the Methodist missionaries were viewed as anti-slavery antagonists and deemed agents from the English-based anti-slavery society. As the chapel were in ruins, Sarah and her sister-in-law, Miss Christina Gill, who were leaders of the church, demonstrated tremendous bravery by opening their homes to enable church members to continue to meet and hold services. The Conventiclers Act of 1664, which stated that no more than 5 persons could gather for worship at any time unless in a licensed meeting place led by a licensed preacher, was considered broken, and Sarah Ann was persecuted by society and the legal authorities. For 1 year, Sarah Ann received threats against her life and warnings that her home would be burnt down. The worship services were deemed illegal meetings by the law courts and resulted in Sarah Ann receiving 2 prosecutions. Accused by magistrates about supposedly harboring guns and ammunition in her home, Sarah Ann was eventually prosecuted by the House of Assembly. Sarah Ann was still determined, as she did not let this persecution discourage her. She defended herself against authorities at her own expense and continued to uphold her strong commitment to religious freedom. Worship services persevered despite the incredible risk, adverse conditions, and constant threat of legal and personal endangerment. On October 19, 1824, the ringleaders of the persecution, the Secret Committee of Public Safety, stated that they would destroy her home. The Secretary of State severely reprimanded Governor Ward for his lack of action in this matter, as it was causing tremendous attention and embarrassment, forcing him to use soldiers to actually protect Sarah Ann, her home, and property. On the 25th of June 1825, the House of Commons in England declared that ample protection and religious toleration would be secured to all its colonial dominions. Sarah Ann Gill's courage and conviction to defend the right for freedom of religion protected the very existence of Methodism in Barbados when it was under severe threat. Sarah Ann was laid to rest on the 25th of February, 1866, in the small cemetery at the back of James Street Chapel. The Gill Memorial Church at Eagle Hall was named after her, and in the 1980s it was replaced by a new Gill Memorial Church at Fairfield Road, Black Rock, and St. Michael. The Right Excellent Clement Osborne Payne, born 1904 and died April 7, 1941. Another national hero of Barbados, born in Trinidad in 1904 to Barbadian parents, Clement Payne was an advocate for the poor in his parents' homeland. A leader in the labor movement, he encouraged workers to come together to join the trade union. Even though Clement Payne was born in Trinidad, he made a very important impact on the society of Barbados. Payne was born to his Barbadian parents who moved back to Barbados when he was 4 years old. Payne attended Bay Street Boys School and worked for some years as a junior clerk. In 1927, he returned to Trinidad where, as an advocate of social justice, he was involved with growth of military trade unionism. In 1937, for 4 months Spain tried to bring the masses together to encourage them to seek a better life and break free from oppression. Public meetings were held in which Paine emphasized the rights of the people, encouraging them to stand up for themselves and insist on better conditions. Viewed as a dangerous revolutionary that threatened the very nature of the planter class, Paine was kept under close observation by the authorities. In 1937, being privy to the labor disputes being held in Trinidad, he held meetings telling the Barbadian public of the developments in their sister island and once again encouraged them to stand up for themselves. When Paine returned to Barbados, he was accused of falsifying a statement to the harbor authorities. Upon entry, they claimed that he stated that his place of birth was Barbados instead of Trinidad. When the case was brought to the trial, Paine pleaded not guilty and the case was postponed. However, when the case was reopened, he pleaded his own case and was found guilty. Ordered to pay £10 sterling or spend 3 months in prison, he appealed this decision and was provided with moral and financial support from the working class. On July 22, 1937, the night after his court appearance, Pale held a meeting and announced that he believed the government had intentionally hidden motives. He stated that he was going to go to Government House the following day to request an audience with the governor. Payne and approximately 300 workers marched on that morning to the governor's residence. He and 13 supporters were arrested and charged for refusing to disperse as an assembled mob when told to do so by police. Everyone present pleaded not guilty, and all were granted bail with the exception of Payne, who was forced into custody. On July 26, 1937, Payne won his appeal against the conviction of making a false declaration regarding his birthplace upon arrival in Barbados, but was still ordered to leave the island. His supporters hired a young attorney by the name of Grantley Adams to represent him in this matter. Adam was aware of the possible physical danger to Payne and advised him not to dispute the deportation order. Clement Payne was deported and was not allowed to enter Barbados again. This action of the authorities and Governor Mark Young drove the general public into agitation. While Payne abhorred violence and his slogan was that of educate, agitate, but not violate. His supporters, overcome by anger at the deportation order, exploded into the streets in angry protest. The riots continued for 4 days in various areas around the island. Armed with sticks and stones, the commercial district was damaged. Cars were pushed into the sea or smashed, show windows were broken, and it was chaos all over. 14 people died, 47 were wounded, 500 arrested, and millions of dollars in property was damaged. A commission of inquiry was appointed by the British government to investigate the situation in Barbados and other British West Indian colonies. The commission determined that all of the charges were to be sustained, and it was decided that the reforms which Payne had suggested should be implemented, the first and foremost of which was the introduction of the trade union legislation. Clement Payne collapsed while speaking at a political meeting in Trinidad on April 7, 1941, and passed away shortly after. Payne's contribution to Barbados is well documented and written down in Barbadian history. In 1989, the Clement Payne Cultural Center was created. Montserrat. William Henry Bramble, born October 8, 1901, and died October 17, 1988. William Henry Bramble, also known as Willie B., was a Union leader and a political party leader from Montserrat. From his Montserrat Labour Party, he was the first chief minister of the country, serving from January 1960 to December 1970. Due to his social understanding for the poor and political action, Bramble is generally regarded as a national hero. William Bramble was the son of J.T. Allen, a famous social activist, and Mary Ryan, a conventional lower-class woman. William had started primary school, but he was unable to finish due to his economic struggles. His mother mostly took care of him during those early years, and William worked the soil of their poor farm while learning trading activities as well. In the 1920s, William Bramble had joined the Seventh-day Adventist Church, started out as an enthusiastic member, but in which then later after, his participation declined. In 1930, Bramble got married to Anne Daly, who was a strict Adventist. They begot 5 children, of whom the oldest would get into politics as well. Bramble had to find the necessary economic means to support his large family. He acquired a small boat and smuggled between the island nations of the Leeward Islands animals, cooking oil, and vegetables of Montserrat and salt of Anguilla. During his travels, Bramble got first acquainted with the regional efforts for unionism, although he would earnestly start in it just later in 1951, when joining the Montserrat Trades and Labor Union, MTLU. William Bramble became a local leader against the alleged economic oppression of the planter owners and political rulers. Reportedly, by then the agricultural wages were well below the level to support livelihoods. Hence, Bramble adopted such causes, particularly organizing periodic strike actions. Initially, William Bramble was deemed unable to vote in Montserrat due to him not fulfilling the requirements of property and income to be enfranchised. In 1952, the country allowed the universal adult suffrage for the first time, and then Bramble capitalized on it, forging his own political power since then. For the elections, Bramble participated actively as the MTLU formed the Montserrat Labour Party, winning the majority of the legislature then. Bramble would eventually become the party's leader. William Bramble died in 1988. He was the first national figure to have a state funeral, and he has the honor of being Montserrat's first national hero. In 1995, the International Airport of Montserrat was renamed after him, but unfortunately the airport was destroyed by the eruption of the Sorferal Hills volcano, which virtually buried half of the nation. Robert William Griffith, born 1904 and died March 17, 1996. Robert William, also called as Mas Bob Griffiths, is another national hero of Montserrat. Griffith was considered the father of Montserrat labor movement. Robert William Griffith was a Methodist and middle class, and his father was a manager on Weeks Estate. Griffith was the first to organize the poor, oppressed working class people into a labor movement in the early 1940s. In 1943, he was the first Montserratian outside the traditional merchant and planter class to win a seat on the Montserrat Legislative Council. Griffith believed in sub-regionalism, and it was with the assistance of Vere Cornwall Bird of Antigua that the Montserrat Trades and Labor Union was established and registered in 1946. Griffith did not hesitate to use the strike weapon even if occasionally things seemed to be doubtful. In 1950 a warship was called and he narrowly missed prison. Mighty Arrow, born November 16, 1949 and died September 15, 2010. Alphonsus Celestine Edmond Cassel, a national hero of Montserrat, Cassel was a calypso and soca musician who performed under the stage name Arrow and is regarded as the first superstar of soca from Montserrat. The Mighty Arrow became the first soca star from Montserrat and the most successful soca artist of all time. Arrow, who reportedly coined his name or stage name out of the respect for Calypsonian Mighty Sparrow, is credited with mixing elements of Latin rhythms, American rock with Caribbean music to create unique sounds that became internationally famous. Cassel first performed at age 10 in a concert at the Montserrat Secondary School. He began singing calypso in 1967 and took the Junior Monarch title that year. He took up singing professionally in 1969, and that year he was the runner-up in the Montserrat Calypso King competition, going on to win the title the following year. He would go on to take the title a total of 4 times. His official debut single, Dance With Me Woman, which was released in 1972, gave him initial success, as did his other hits called Bump and Wine and Long Time. His most famous track, which gave him international success, was Hot Hot Hot, which made Arrow a worldwide name, putting calypso and soca into the limelight and also helped to push Caribbean music on the international scene. His tune, Hot Hot Hot, is the single most well-known tune in soca history and has given him greater royalties and more acclaim than all of the other soca artists together. The idea for the song came when Arrow was performing in a club in Holland. With the crowd yelling for an encore and being out of rehearsal material, Arrow began chanting, "How you feeling?" Responded was one sweaty dancer that yelled, "Hot, hot, hot." Arrow was diagnosed with cerebral cancer in early 2009. He continued to work in music and TV until his last days. The Mighty Arrow died peacefully at his home in Montserrat with his family at his side on the 15th of September 2010 at age 60. Guyana. Cuffy, born unknown, died 1763. Cuffy or Kofi is a national hero of Guyana. He was an Akan man who was captured in his native West African country and sold into slavery to work in the plantations of the Dutch colony of Berbice in present-day Guyana. In 1763, he led a revolt of more than 2,500 slaves against the colony regime, which made him famous as a hero among the enslaved. Cuffy lived in Lilienberg, a plantation on the Conja River, as a house slave for a slave master called Cooper, who was a barrel maker. An uprising broke out at Magellanenburg Plantation, Upper Kaja River, on February 1763 and moved on to neighboring plantations, attacking owners. When Governor Van Hoggenheim sent military assistance to the region, the rebellion had reached the Berbice River and was moving steadily towards the Berbice capital, Fort Nassau. They took gunpowder and guns from the attacked plantations. By March 3rd, the rebels were 500 in number. Led by Kosala, they tried to take the brick house of Peerboom. They agreed to allow the whites to leave the brick house, but as soon as they left, the rebels killed many and took several prisoners. Among these prisoners was the wife of the Beerstein plantation owner, whom Cuffy kept as his wife as well. Cuffy was soon accepted by the rebels as their leader and declared himself governor of Berbice. Doing so, he made one of his associates named Akara as his deputy and tried to establish discipline among the troops. Akara was skillful in military discipline. They organized the farms in order to provide food supplies. Due to the impact of the rebellion, Van Guggenheim committed himself to retake the colony. Akara attacked the whites 3 times without permission from Cuffy, but they were driven back. Thus, a dispute began among the 2 rebels. On April the 2nd, 1763, Cuffy wrote to Van Guggenheim saying that he did not want a war against the whites and proposed a partition of Berbice with the whites occupying the coastal areas and the blacks the interior. Van Guggenheim delayed his decision, waiting for support from neighboring colonies. Cuffy then ordered his forces to attack the whites on May 13, 1763, but doing so had many losses. The defeat opened a division among the rebels and weakened their organization. Akara became the leader of a new faction opposed to Cuffy and led to a civil war among themselves. When Akara won, Cuffy killed himself. The anniversary of the Cuffy Slave Rebellion on February 23rd has been a Republic Day in Guyana since 1970. Cuffy is commemorated in the 1763 monument in the Square of the Revolution in the capital, Georgetown. Hi everybody, just here wishing you a happy Black History Month. Even though I celebrate Black History throughout the year, 365 days a year, because I celebrate me, I celebrate my ancestry, I celebrate my heritage, Black history. So, as we reflect upon the histories of African peoples, the achievements, the pain, the suffering, the joys, let us also keep in mind that being Black or being African is an everyday thing, which I love. And I am so grateful that I came into this life as an African man, as a Black man, as a Black person. So, yes, let us reflect on Black history every day. And that's it for today. Until next time, remember this. With wisdom and knowledge of self, you hold the world in your hands. Take care, my people.